Hey everyone! So in this video, I want to go through every single book that I've read in the month of January and how I liked them or didn't like them, and then talk about what books I'm planning on reading in the next month, February. So starting off with the first book that I read this year is this, A Pale Blue Dot by Carl Sagan. Pale Blue Dot, A Vision of the Human Future in Space by Carl Sagan. Now, I didn't read this whole book this month because it's kind of a dense book, very long book. I started reading this in December, probably only had 30 or 40 pages remaining in January to finish this book off, but since I finished it in January, I'm going to count it as a book that I read in January because I finished it. And I gotta say, if you've been watching my channel for probably like an extended period of time, you're already gonna know I absolutely love everything I've read by Carl Sagan. I think he is a fantastic author. He really has a way with words. What I always like to say is that he speaks poetry. And I mean, maybe that's a little hyperbole, but he really does have this way with words where he can explain these really difficult topics in a way that it's very easily understood by pretty much anyone. And you can tell through his writing that he absolutely loves this stuff that he's writing about, that he's talking about. This book in particular, this book talks about where humanity has come from, where we currently stand, and where we could possibly be in the future. And I gotta say, the first maybe half of this book is honestly a little bit depressing because it really goes into all of the mistakes that humankind has made and how on multiple times throughout history we have nearly come to like self-implosion, destroying ourselves and the entire planet, really. But we haven't, not yet. And the fact is we have learned from our mistakes in the past and are working towards a better future. You might kind of disagree on that front. I kind of do myself a little bit, but ultimately, the first half of this book is kind of depressing because it really focuses on like, look at all these mistakes we've done, look at all these stupid things we've done, look at all these really kind of pointless squabbles we've had in the past. But then halfway through the book, it really takes a turn and really talks about how, you know, where we currently stand. And I gotta say, this book was written in the 90s, so it is a little bit outdated, especially when it's talking about, you know, astronomy and, you know, things that were going on at that time, and especially when it talks about technology. It is a little bit outdated in that regards. Not too outdated, though, where the book is pointless. Definitely not at all. Still is absolutely a relevant book. A book I would, of course, recommend, even if you're not into astronomy. It is an astronomy book because, again, Carl Sagan, astronomy. But it very much has a like a philosophical point of view in this book as well. So while it is astronomy, maybe a little bit of philosophy in this book as well. Gotta say, absolutely love this book. I thought it was fantastic. This is, I think, the last book that I had to read from Carl Sagan. I think I've read every single book by Carl Sagan, other than maybe one more book. I need to double check, but this is the last Carl Sagan book I had on my bookshelf that I had to read. I have every single thing that Carl Sagan has written, other than maybe one book. And this is, of course, like excluding his essays and science, you know, science journals and science magazines and those things that he's contributed to along the way as well. But talking about his main novels that he's written, his main astronomy novels, and he has a science fiction book, Contact, which is also a fantastic book as well, recommend. But yeah, I think I've pretty much read everything by Carl Sagan after this. It's not my favorite Carl Sagan book, but it is up there. I still think The Demon Haunted World, I still think that is my favorite Carl Sagan book, but still, absolutely recommend this book. I thought it was fantastic. The next book I read is this, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that last name correct. Now, this book is very interesting, mainly because of one point. When you're reading through this book, you might be like, wow, cool, this is, it makes sense. It talks about, how military tactics and how to have a successful army, a successful military, if you want to, defeat your enemy, obviously. But reading through this book, you might be like, yeah, okay, this is pretty relevant. I wonder when it was written. And then you might think, maybe it's been written in the past 100 years, maybe the last couple hundred years. It certainly can't be older than like 500, definitely not over 1,000 years old, right? This book was written in the year 500 BCE. So this book is 2,500 years old. And the fact that it is still incredibly relevant is honestly just impressive. Now, maybe that kind of tells you something about warfare and war, and the fact that really hasn't changed in the past 2,000 plus years, because apparently it hasn't. But the part I gotta say I really like about this is, obviously it was written with the intent to describe how to have a successful army, how to really excel at war, the art of war. But, and I know I'm not the first person to say this book can also be used for like if you're running a business. It talks about like the various ways where to be successful in war is also applicable to how to be successful in a business. Talking about how, you don't want to completely demolish your enemy. You want to see, if you can defeat your enemy without actually going to war with them. You never want to, you never want to corner your enemy without leaving them I think it was like an outlet to escape, because, people kind of do crazy things if they're in a corner and they have no last resort to go to. The one thing, though, that I think businesses could learn from is that a big part of this book actually talks about how you treat your soldiers in your military, and how you treat them respect, and how you take care of them, and doing all these things which really leads to a successful military is, of course, having people that you care for that make up your military. Maybe that's something that businesses just don't do, and I don't really want to go down a big rabbit hole on this, but for example, let's say the CEO of Walmart. I really doubt the CEO of Walmart really cares about Gertrude the cashier. I really doubt it. Maybe he does. Maybe the CEO of Walmart's a really good guy. I have no idea. I've never worked for Walmart and I don't know anything about the CEO. But a lot of the CEOs for these really big companies, you kind of get the impression that they don't care at all about their employees, which causes employee morale to, go down, which then means employees aren't, they aren't putting their best foot forward. They're not really trying to do the absolute best for the company. They're not trying to make the company excel as much as possible. They're just doing their job so that they can get their paycheck and, go home and live their lives. And honestly, I think I know I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here, so I'm going to kind of end it here. But honestly, I think that a lot of businesses could learn a thing or two from this, especially big businesses. Smaller businesses, yeah, sure, they absolutely care, about their employees, which really helps those businesses, especially if it's like a family-owned business and it's not some like publicly traded, like huge company on the S&P 500 or something like that. But anyways, this book I thought was absolutely fantastic. The fact that it was written that long ago and is still relevant to our world nowadays is just really, really quite amazing. It is a very short book too. Like, what? Not even 100 pages, like 70 pages, and, not too dense at all. It's just like bullet points of the different rules or the different arts of warfare, separated into various chapters that discusses like, the different tactics and the different aspects of war and military. But yeah, I thought this was, again, another fantastic book. The next book I read was on my Kindle, and it is, if I can pull it up, maybe. It is this. This is His Last Bow by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So this is a collection of short stories following Sherlock Holmes. I've read almost every single Sherlock Holmes book. After reading this, I just have one more Sherlock Holmes book that I need to read, and then I'm going to have read every single Sherlock Holmes book. I gotta say, this is my least favorite Sherlock Holmes book I've read so far. Now, that being said, every single Sherlock Holmes book I've read, I've thought has been absolutely fantastic. So the fact that I'm putting this at the bottom of that list, this is still a fantastic book. Very, very good book, but is probably my least favorite of the Sherlock Holmes stories that I have read. It's just, a couple of them are, so it's a collection of short stories. This one short story, I forget what it's titled. I think it's like The Dying Detective, or the detective that's dying. It's something like that. But a lot of the enjoyment I get from reading Sherlock Holmes is, you never know what's going to happen. Like, oh, there's always going to be a big twist at the end. And the thing with that short story, I could see right from the beginning where that was going from a mile away. I wasn't surprised at all how that story went. I was like, yeah, I know exactly how this is going to end. And I was right. So it kind of was, that short story probably was my least favorite. Another short story actually titled His Last Bow, which the novel is titled after. His Last Bow, that's a very different kind of story, because every other Sherlock Holmes story, at least everyone I've read, has been written from the character of Watson, Dr. Watson. His Last Bow, the short story in this book, is written from the third person, and unlike it being, a mystery novel, it's more of like a spy thriller short story. It's not a mystery at all. It's more of like a spy thriller kind of story, and I mean, it just didn't land with me at all. So I didn't really care for that short story either, but the other ones in here were absolutely fantastic. So with that is why I kind of rank this, at the bottom of the Sherlock Holmes books that I've read, but still a very good book. Now, the next book I've read, well, not read, I'm actually in the process of reading it, is this, Moby Dick by Herman Melville. So what you might have noticed is a couple of these books are actually pretty short. What I like doing at the beginning of the year is reading shorter books first. That way I get off to a really good start of like, wow, look at all these books I've read. I already read 3 books this year, which is honestly pretty good for me. I try to average like 2 a month. I mean, to be fair, Pale Blue Dot only had like 30 or 40 pages less to finish. This book, unlike those other ones, is very, very dense. I'm only, what is that, halfway-ish through? Well, a little bit more. I'm on page 320 out of like 500 and something. So we'll say 2/3 of the way through this book. I'm very conflicted on my enjoyment of this book. And that's because there are parts of this that I really, really do like. I like the overall story a lot, but then also on the flip side, and I don't want to pass judgment on a book I haven't finished reading, but I'm going to. So on the flip side of, I really like the story, it also goes into these weird tangents about the whaling industry and whale biology. And shameless self-plug, I actually made a skit about this book because I was just like, wow, what is going on? And it really kind of hampers my enjoyment of this book, honestly, quite a bit. If it just focused on the main story without delving into the the whaling industry and random whale facts, I'd probably be enjoying it a lot more than I would otherwise. I'd probably be a lot further along in this, honestly, too, because a lot of this book is actually devoted to the whaling industry and whale facts for some reason. The one thing I will say, though, that's kind of gives me a little bit of enjoyment about this is while I'm reading this book, I can be like to my wife, oh, time for random whale facts. And then I'll tell her about the whale facts that I'm reading in this book. And it kind of drives her a little bit crazy as she's like trying to play her video games. And that amuses me a little bit. So it does give me a little bit of enjoyment reading that, at least from that aspect. But again, I don't want to pass too much of a judgment on this book since I am only about halfway through it. But with that, I do plan on finishing this book in February. At least that's my goal, if I can get through it. It's been a slog. I mean, the language in this book is not very easy. I mean, honestly, I almost feel like I'm back in school again, like back in high school or college, like reading, a book where it almost challenges me on an intellectual level to understand what the heck the author is talking about. And it took me a little while for my brain to click back into that old habit of, okay, I need to like read this slower. I can't speed read this at all. Not that I really speed read any of my books, but I definitely can't do it with this book. I really need to take my time and really try to understand what the author is trying to tell me, which slows down my progress in reading this book. But I do plan on finishing this in February. And then that will lead to what books I plan on reading in February. And I have a couple more shorter books, especially after reading Moby Dick, that I do want to read, starting with this. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This is, of course, a Christmas classic. A lot of the movies based off of this book, I absolutely love. My kids love the Mickey Mouse version of this story as well. But this is a very short book, like 100 pages. So after reading Moby Dick, I need something short. It should be fairly easy to understand, or at least that's my understanding of what this book is. Plus, I already know what the story's about anyway. So that is, after Moby Dick, this is going to be the next book that I read. And then I have this, The Valley of Fear by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And this is the last Sherlock Holmes book I need to read, and then I'm gonna have read everything Sherlock Holmes. This, unlike his last battle, which was a collection of short stories, this is an actual novel. And again, a nice, really short book. Only like 100 pages. Although, wow, that's a full page of text, so maybe we'll call that like, 150 to like 200 pages of a normal book. But yeah, should be, in theory, another quick, easy book to read after getting through Moby Dick. And then, if I can finish all of those, my goal is going to be to continue reading The Wheel of Time with book number 9 in the series, which is Winter's Heart. I gotta say, with the first 5 or maybe 6, probably just 5, the first 5 like Wheel of Time books, I was absolutely loving this series. Loved it a lot. However, the last few books in this series, I gotta say, I've really been questioning how much I like this series anymore. To the point where I was almost getting to the point where I was gonna just stop reading it. But I don't want to, because at least from what people have been telling me online, the series does improve later on, especially I think it's with book 11, the series really starts to pick up again. So I don't know what that necessarily means for this, if this is going to be another book where I'm just going to be like, oh my goodness, I can't, I'm bored, nothing's happening, especially the last book. Nothing happened. The last like 2 or 3 books, I don't know, hardly anything happens in them. And it's just going so slow, and there's nothing really interesting happening, unlike the first 5 or so books, which I absolutely loved. But I'm going to try it. I'm going to try to read continue reading through the series because I was really enjoying it, and just with the last few books, I really have not been enjoying it. We'll see how it goes, though. So, you know, if I get through all those other books, I'm definitely not gonna be able to finish this in February. I doubt, because this is a long book. It's like 600 or 500, 500 pages. But that's gonna be my goal. And that is what we have. All the books that I read in January, all of them, I really liked. What was my favorite one, you ask? Pale Blue Dot. I'm gonna go with that one. That was probably my favorite one. And then all the books that I have on my table to read for the month of February. Anyways, that's all I have in this video. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down below. Or if you've, read any of these books that I've read, or if you've read Moby Dick, how did that go for you? I know people either love this book or hate it. Right now, I'm kind of in the... I don't want to pass judgment. I haven't finished the book. Okay, so I'm not going to pass judgment on it. I'm definitely going to fall into one of those camps, though, where I think I'm leaning one way. Anyways, that's the end. Those are the books that I read in January, and those are the books that I'm planning on reading in February. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see y'all again next week. Bye.